A million years ago, Italy was a battlefield, where enormous violent volcanoes offered competing displays of bursts of fire, lava flows, clouds of hot ash, and showers of lapilli. They raised mountains and erased valleys. It was a mineral world. There was no room for plants or animals. Then, 100,000 years ago, one by one, the volcanoes stopped erupting. Rain gradually filled the ancient craters, turning them into lakes. It was the beginning of a new adventure for life, which this time conquered the land of volcanoes. Many of the most beautiful Italian islands have volcanic origins. Stromboli, Lipari and Vulcano, as well as Linosa and Pantelia, are all the result of gigantic and violent volcanoes that built new land with explosions of fire, lava flows, clouds of incandescent ash and lapilli fallout. At their birth, these islands were worlds of minerals with no room for life. They were mountains of rocks and black, brown and red sands, scorched by the sun, rising from deep, dark seabeds. But then, courageous plants and animals colonized the now cold lava. And soon after, humans arrived. Today, they still battle against the wind and the fire of the earth to turn the volcanic islands into lush gardens. The evolution of life in this, and in fact in all the islands, is one of the most fascinating examples of biogeography, the science that studies the distribution of organisms on the planet. From the biogeographical point of view, the islands can be classified in two main categories: continental and oceanic islands. The former once formed part of a larger landmass from which they were separated as a result of rising sea levels or movements of the Earth's crust. For example, the island of Lampione, one of the Pelagi Islands, is part of the North African platform and is uninhabited by the same reptiles that live in Tunisia, as well as other plants and animals that lived there before it separated from the African continent. Other islands are classified as oceanic, even if they are in small enclosed seas like the Mediterranean. One of these is Linosa. Although it is one of the Pelagi Islands like Lampione, it has a completely different origin. Then there are the Aeolian Islands, the Wind Islands, of which Vulcano is the closest to Sicily. These islands arose from the bottom of the sea, following the eruption of submarine volcanoes. That is why they were initially virgins, like the surface of the moon, and only over time were colonized by the organisms that arrived there after short or longer journeys across the sea. The ladybird is a tiny insect with two small wings that support it for short and barely controlled flights. But if it is caught by a gust of wind, it can travel in the air for tens of kilometers before landing. These fell in the wrong place, on the crest of the island of Vulcano, where there are no plants nor aphids on which to feed. They can only hope to resume their flight and land somewhere greener. They deserve some luck, because they have already flown at least 12 miles, the distance that separates the island of Vulcano from the Sicilian coast. A modest but continuous emission of sulfur-laden vapours from the main and secondary craters testifies that the volcano on the island of Vulcano is merely sleeping, and sooner or later will wake up. But for now, plants and animals benefit from the short ceasefire and can try to recover the time and space lost after the last eruption, which took place at the end of the 19th century. So these rocks have had around 125 years to fill with plants and animals. But apparently, not much has happened. An unreal silence reigns on the crest of the volcano, only broken by the distant calls of birds singing much lower down. Colonization is extremely slow because the difficulties that plants and animals have to face are many and almost insurmountable. Yet, sooner or later, life takes hold. Broom is one of the few plants able to grow on land subject to landslides. Its roots go deep to anchor the shrub to the ground, even where the soil is more compact and etched with small gorges excavated by the rare but torrential winter rains. If people had not had goats, they would never have been able to live permanently on volcanic islands. These animals can live on very little water, which they take from dew and the meagre fodder. Their milk yields are low, but the milk is highly nutritious and rich in salts, as the ancients knew very well. Zeus, the father of the gods, was said to have been fed by a rustic, frugal Mediterranean goat just like this. In Salina, the centuries-long calm has allowed more mature vegetation to develop on the fertile volcanic soils. The evergreen plants have leaves covered with a waxy cuticle. Thanks to this coating, which functions like a raincoat but keeping moisture in rather than out, lush scrublands have formed on Salina. In summer, they resound with the deafening chirping of cicadas. The cicadas are among the first settlers of volcanic islands. Unlike the little ladybirds, they have long wings and are able to fly over the open sea for several kilometers. The nymphs develop underground and remain buried alive for 7 years, eating sap from tree roots. After this long period underground, they emerge into the open, leaving their shell on the trunks and the branches, and start to sing. They spend a few weeks in the top of the trees in the summer sun, just long enough to mate and lay eggs. Then their life cycle is complete. Those with wings have an advantage. But even those who make cobwebs have found a way to fly over the open sea for miles. Some species of spiders are carried by the wind using a silk thread as a parachute. Once they reach the island, if they do not want to travel anymore, they can do without wings. The Carabus morbillosus beetle has atrophied wings enclosed in its fused elytra. It secretes a disgusting substance that protects it from being eaten by lizards, the most common vertebrates on the Aeolian Islands, which certainly did not swim here. In fact, lizards do not like getting wet, especially in salt water. These little predators are able to survive in a few square meters of rocks lashed by waves, swept by the wind and scorched by the sun. But they cannot stand the idea of ending up in the water. Each male defends a small territory, chasing away potential competitors and letting only females remain. The most beautiful of the lizards on the volcanic islands, as black as the rocks on which it lives, is the Maltese lizard, which can also be found in Linosa. It moves agilely across the stones that in the warmest part of the day can reach temperatures of 60 degrees centigrade, looking for anything edible. The buzzards are the largest winged predators on the archipelago. They are adaptable creatures that hunt small rodents, rabbits, and lizards. Among the very few other sedentary species are the goldfinches. If you look at them carefully and listen to their song, they seem a little different from their relatives on the mainland, as if they are about to turn into a new species. As has happened with the sparrows on the island of Vulcano, a population distinct from others living in Italy. The wildlife is richer in Lipari, the largest and most inhabited island of the archipelago. Its slopes are covered in dense shrubs of lady's mantle that reach the seashore. From Lipari, you can see the northern coast of Sicily and Mount Etna. The summit of Etna is covered in snow in winter because it reaches 3,350 meters in altitude, and despite the volcanic emissions, it is in the grip of frost for many months. Even Vulcano and Stromboli could have peaks covered in snow, because they are more than 3,000 meters high, except for one detail. The first 2,000 meters, 2/3 of their height, are below the surface of the sea, so their real height is less than 1,000 meters. However, the main difference is not the obvious presence of snow on the summit of Etna, but is present at the organic level. While Vulcano, Stromboli and the other volcanoes of the Aeolian Islands are surrounded by the sea, Etna is surrounded by land. The population of the islands is the result of a delicate balance between the species that settle and those that become extinct. Humans intervene to modify the balance, not only by causing or accelerating extinctions, but also by bringing animals and foreign plants. For example, collared doves are closely linked to humans and could not live in a completely natural habitat, which is why they thrive among houses and gardens. Humans have managed to colonize the volcanic islands and to settle permanently in many of them. But even today, they have to deal with the limitations imposed by one of the most hostile environments on the planet. If the sea is rough, ships cannot sail, and since there are no airports, the Aeolian Islands return to their isolation for many days, for everyone, even humans. A mistral wind has blown up, and the sea is gradually becoming rough. Force 6 and 7 according to the shipping forecasts. Waves lash the northern coast of the island. It seems impossible that the rocks can resist this fury, yet they have been there for millions of years. The mistral lasts for 5 days, then, little by little, the sea calms. Entire marine meadows of Posidonia seagrass have been torn up by the waves and now lie heaped on the beaches. Among it are some survivors that have been swept off course and miraculously escaped the fury of the storm. A swarm of migratory locusts was caught up in the fury of the wind and has been transported hundreds of miles away from North Africa, where it was devouring the meagre vegetation. Many drowned, but some were lucky enough to end up in the shelter of the coast and find dry land. They do not manage to breed, at least for the moment, but in the future, with rising temperatures and the northward expansion of arid areas, they could end up becoming regular guests to southern Italy. For many invertebrates, the storm is a boon. It leaves refuse and dead fish behind on the rocks, and crabs, with their sharp sense of smell, can locate them in a matter of moments. The problem, if any, is sharing out the spoils. In one corner, smaller crabs, slender but fast runners. In the other, a slow, fat, marbled rock crab. The match seems to have turned in favour of the rock crab, a true heavyweight, who drags his prey into his lair. But then he has to accept to share it with his cousins, who may be featherweights, but are very tenacious. The Aeolian Islands belong to a volcanic chain of the southern Tyrrhenian Sea, which here is over 3,000 meters deep. At some tens of meters below the surface, the lava rocks are colonized by a fantastic patch of Gorgonian coral, or sea fans, and other aquatic invertebrates, populated by many forms of life. By the flashing lights of a submarine exploration vehicle, we discover an unusual, almost lunar landscape. A wavy plain buried under a layer of fine, almost weightless sediments. At times, small craters open up, evidence of the volcanic activity still underway in this part of the southern Tyrrhenian Sea. Some of these chimneys emit jets of cold water, others release hot water saturated with sulfur and carbon dioxide. It is an extreme environment, sunk in perennial darkness. Yet life has found a way to establish itself here too. In particular, microscopic organisms that derive the energy they need to live from the reactions from the numerous chemical compounds present in the water. These waters have some of the most dense fish populations in the Mediterranean, thanks to a fortunate combination of strong summer sunshine and cold rising currents. The sea currents, which come from the eastern Mediterranean, flow deep down, touching the seabed. But when they reach the volcanic cones of the Aeolian Islands, they are forced to turn upwards towards the surface. Then they become rising currents, upwelling, and bring to the surface chemical compounds from the seabed that fertilize the water and encourage the proliferation of plankton. The plankton are the beginnings of a rich food chain that benefits both humans and seabirds, especially shearwaters. Similar to the albatrosses, shearwaters fish on the high seas for several days in a row and then return to the nest where their companion or chick is waiting for them. For these birds, the islands are like an aircraft carrier from which to take off for their hunting, or rather, fishing trips. The rough sea, when the wind blows at 40 knots and obliges fishing boats to repair leeward, does not stop the shearers, which speed without apparent effort across the waves. Hundreds of miles a day are not a problem for the larger shearwaters, who come ashore only to reproduce, choosing the steepest and most inaccessible stretches of the Lipari crags. They exploit the clefts between the boulders and the burrows of wild rabbits, where it's cooler, and choose the darkest hours of the night to return to land, to avoid running the risk of meeting gulls that could steal their food. In total darkness, the silence that reigns on the northern coast is interrupted by a concerto of cries. They sound like sobs, the wailing of a newborn baby, or laments. For the ancient peoples of the sea, they were the dirges of the warriors of Diomedes, mourning the death of their leader, a hero of the Trojan War. Much simpler are the communication and courtship cries of the Cories shearwaters that inhabit the largest colony in the central Mediterranean. They are sea creatures, spending months on end without ever seeing dry land, but now they are facing the most difficult moments of their existence. Contact with the earth, an environment that they find hostile. They are large birds, the size of a seagull, with hooked beaks and webbed feet. The hoarse, low cry of the female and the higher note of the male follow one another and create a rhythm. Some specimens bear a ring that was applied to their feet in the past, some more than 30 years ago. They are old acquaintances of the ornithologists and return every year to nest in the same cavities they occupied the previous year. Technology has given researchers satellite mini-recorders, GPS and GLS devices. These are miniaturized so as not to cause the birds any discomfort, are attached to the legs or back, and record the position the shearwaters reach in the course of 10 days or after a full year. This will make it possible to discover where they go to look for food during the mating season and where they spend the winter. Only at the end of the breeding season do they leave the Mediterranean to winter in the Atlantic waters off the coast of Senegal, feeding in those stormy seas teeming with fish. Fortunately, apart from humans, shearwaters have few natural enemies. Or rather, they had few natural enemies. Even in the most remote areas of the rocks, several predatory animals from the mainland have appeared. Versatile, agile and daring predators, black rats, brought to the island inadvertently by men, became very common and found food to live on around the houses, but especially in the shearwater colony. They discovered that the eggs and youngest and most defenseless chicks made an excellent meal. In a few years, 70% of the incubating eggs had been destroyed by the greedy rodents. In a small, inaccessible rock live some pairs of a miniature version of the albatross, the storm petrel. For 350 days a year, it is impossible to approach the small rock. In front is the open sea. The slightest wind and the sea begins to heave and the waves beat violently against the rocks. This is one of the few places in the world where one of the Mediterranean's most mysterious inhabitants, the storm petrel, breeds. Despite its small size, the storm petrel is related to the largest birds in the world, the albatross, although it weighs just 30 grams and has a 35-centimetre wingspan. They are birds of the open seas, pelagic to use the precise term, and come to dry land only to reproduce. Storm petrels materialize, as if by magic, from April, but always at night, moving safely in total darkness. They lay only one, rather large egg. There is nothing darker than the darkness of a grotto during a moonless night, and yet these birds fly in confidently through the narrowest fissures. How they orient themselves is still a mystery. Perhaps like bats or the oil birds of the caves of South America, which navigate by echolocation. In fact, their agile flight is accompanied by the most unusual cries that bounce off obstacles and may serve to guide their movements. The precision with which each parent finds its young in the almost complete darkness is extraordinary. They are probably guided by the chick's chirping, which is unique to each individual. Here, shot with an infrared camera, is the delicate phase of finding the beak. Everything happens in almost total darkness. Their nourishment consists mainly of planktonic crustaceans, tiny fish and squid belonging to species that live on the high seas. Plankton, the same that sustains storm petrels, is at the base of the food chain that leads to the largest animals on the planet. Until the recent past, it was thought that the great cetaceans entered the Mediterranean only occasionally, through the Strait of Gibraltar, coming from the Atlantic Ocean. It was also believed that they did not stay for long, just long enough to take a swim in the clear, warm waters of this small inland sea. But research carried out in recent decades has shown that their presence is stable, and that there are populations of sperm whales and blue whales that live only in the Mediterranean, concentrated in the most favourable areas. Groups of pilot whales crisscross off the Aeolian Islands, along with Risso's dolphins, great squid hunters. Spotted and bottlenose dolphins follow the schools of sardines in search of easy prey. They make long movements in the three-dimensional universe that for them has no boundaries. Storm petrels and shearwaters feed on cephalopods, squid and octopus, and pelagic fish, which are a vital link in the food chain that transfers energy from phytoplankton to the fastest and most fascinating predators in the Mediterranean, the tuna. The tuna is a large and rapid fish. The largest specimens can measure 3 meters in length and weigh 1 ton. Warm blood flows through its arteries. Its streamlined shape and powerful muscles allow it to swim at 90 miles an hour, and its breeding capacity is amazing. Tuna have been a vital resource for the coastal populations of the Mediterranean for thousands of years, but they are difficult to catch as they are large and open water fish. It took all the ingenuity of first the Phoenicians and then the Arabs and other ancient peoples to design a system for catching them. The tonara. This is a complex of fixed nets made up of robust nets fixed to the seabed by large metal anchors. The net must be perfectly taut from the bottom to the surface in order to form an impenetrable wall that can intercept the schools of tuna that enter the Mediterranean through the Strait of Gibraltar and move along the coast to spawn, and force them into the giant trap from which they will only emerge when they are dead. It is a thrilling spectacle, no doubt, but it has its rules. The tuna should not suffer unnecessarily. The young fish are spared and thrown back into the sea. The tonara is the only method of fishing that allows only tuna to be caught, and only mature adults. The pressure on Mediterranean marine resources has become unsustainable. Fish stocks are becoming exhausted, and many species are on the road to extinction. Even red tuna may become a thing of the past. Humans were among the last creatures to reach the islands, attracted by what the eruptions had brought to the surface from the womb of the earth. Among Lipari's most valuable products are obsidian, a substance of glassy consistency used to build blades and arrowheads, as well as kaolin, indispensable for hardening terracotta, and the pumice stone, which has always played an important role in construction due to its light weight. Once they arrived on the islands, they had to cultivate the sand and the volcanic rock. But the main problem has always been the scarcity of fresh water. In Pantelia, a volcanic island on the other side of Sicily from the Aeolian Islands, there is an entire lake, but its waters, while they may look inviting, are actually a poisonous broth, saturated with chemical compounds. The islanders collect rainwater, exploiting the domed roofs that convey it to underground cisterns. These islands produce a large part of Italy's capers, as well as olives, citrus fruits and vines, which grow in small spaces protected by the stone walls that shelter them from the wind and preserve the humidity. The rich cultivation encourages the presence of animals, and the migratory birds that move between Africa and Europe stop over on the islands. They are tiny birds. The flycatcher weighs 10 grams, the melodious warbler less than 8, and the winchat 6 grams. Yet they are extraordinary travellers that have crossed the desert and the sea, navigating by the sun and stars to come to nest in the woods and countryside of Europe and Asia. The seagulls are waiting for them. Their flight is rapid and their appetite insatiable. They are able to chase birds until they fall, exhausted, into the water. But once they reach the land, the little birds are safe and only have to think about drinking, eating and resting before the next stop.
In these little islands, early autumn coincides with a second spring. The first rains after months of drought give new life to the vegetation, and dracunculus flowers bloom among the shrubs. This is a plant of the aroid family, which rather than having a sweet perfume, stinks like rotting meat to attract the flies that help pollinate it. Many Mediterranean bushes are covered with fruits and berries of all kinds, food for many species of small migratory birds.
When these little birds come down from the north to go back to winter in Africa, they once again face a tiring and risky journey, made even more dramatic by the Eleonora's falcons, the great birds of prey with scythe wings and the lightning flight waiting for them on the cliffs. They too are migratory, and once the young have grown, will leave for a long journey that will take them all the way to Madagascar. Stromboli is the last island of the volcanic arch of the Aeolian Islands and is the most remote. Surrounded by miles of open sea, it has been reached only by a small fraction of the plants and animals that live in Lipari or Salina. There are some lizards and a few sedentary birds, including the inevitable sparrows. Stromboli, which is almost 1,000 meters above sea level, is a young volcano. It is only 100,000 years old, and like all youngsters, it is very lively. It is considered the most active volcano in the Mediterranean because its 3 vents are in perennial explosive activity. An explosion occurs every 10 to 20 seconds. It is accompanied by the launch of boulders, bombs, which fall along the steep slope that descends directly into the sea. Sometimes the eruption is accompanied by the emission of liquid lava, which flows downwards, accompanied by landslides that also generate small tsunamis. The volcano then begins to look like an immense and interminable firework, visible from a great distance. it has always been a beacon for sailors. The owls are taken by surprise, perhaps even a little frightened. They cling together to get through this very unusual night. When calm returns, relative calm because the volcano never sleeps, the island rouses itself from the trance state into which it has fallen during the last violent eruption and resumes its life, following the same slow rhythm of time immemorial. Although water today arrives on tankers and links to the mainland are frequent, this and the other wind islands continue to remain hostage to the waters of the sea and the fires of the earth. There are few things you can be sure of in this world, but one thing is certain. This eruption will not be the last, and life here will always be an uphill struggle. A million years ago, Italy was a battlefield, where enormous violent volcanoes offered competing displays of bursts of fire, lava flows, clouds of hot ash, and showers of lapilli. They raised mountains and erased valleys. It was a mineral world. There was no room for plants or animals. Then, 100,000 years ago, one by one the volcanoes stopped erupting. Rain gradually filled the ancient craters, turning them into lakes. It was the beginning of a new adventure for life, which this time conquered the land of volcanoes. These pines, whipped by the storm, are all less than 50 years old. They cannot be a day older, because 50 years ago, the temperature of the rocks here exceeded 1,000 degrees, and everything burned within a radius of hundreds of meters. These black rocks that had just erupted from the crater of Mount Etna were fluid and incandescent. No form of life could withstand the terrible heat that had sprung from the womb of the Earth through the highest active volcano in Europe. The seeds that gave rise to these trees arrived soon afterwards, when the lava had cooled. These pines have brought with them a small bird, the red crossbill, which feeds on pine nuts. Etna's crossbills are quite different from those that live in the rest of Europe and are likely to belong to an exclusive local subspecies. These pines, however, cannot expect to survive for long, because for 200,000 years Etna has never stopped determining the fate of plants, animals, and humans. After the eruption, there is no peace, only a truce. Sometimes short, sometimes longer. Etna threatens not only shrubs and woods, but also crops, homes, and an entire city. Catania, one of the most heavily populated in Sicily and the Mediterranean. Here, people live permanently in its grip, because Etna is still one of the most formidable volcanoes in the world. This volcano was well known to the ancients. It was visible from far off for those coming from the sea between Sicily and Greece. The Arabs, who for a long time dominated this island, the largest in the Mediterranean and among the most fertile and rich, called it Jebel, the mountain, from which it derives its second name, Mongibello. Etna is a unique world, not only for volcanologists, but also for naturalists. This mountain rises from the plain of the river Simeto, where every summer temperatures reach over 40 degrees, and is covered with snow and ice on its summit. In these 3,300 meters of difference in height, the environment changes continuously, from the highly cultivated lower slopes to the increasingly wild terrain, and higher up until the point where people have had to give up entirely. Here, it is the volcano that rules. Plants and animals know it, but that doesn't mean they give up trying to challenge it. The environments of Etna can be represented as a series of concentric circles, depending on the altitude and age of the lava and ash deposits. The central circle, the smallest, corresponds to the top of the volcano. Here, the lava is recent and is continually renewed by new flows. There is snow for 6 months of the year, and often the temperature drops below zero. But as soon as the white blanket withdraws, life timidly returns. Some boulders, true volcanic bombs, weigh tons and were launched hundreds of meters high during the most violent eruptions, when the pressure of the underground gas reached unsustainable levels. Now they lie inert, but their impact on the ground has been as violent as that of an explosion. Only a few specialized plants and heroic creatures manage to live in this environment that resembles the Earth at the dawn of life. Oedipus grasshoppers are the colour of the lava. They can survive up to an altitude of 3,000 metres and are only active for 3 months of the year. In this period, males and females have to find each other, court, and then lay their eggs, hoping that small birds like the resident black redstart don't spot them. It is usually the males that produce the shrill sound by rubbing one tegmen against the other. Crickets sing to mark their territory, ward off other males, or to attract females. The lava is shattered into small stones, a difficult terrain for plant life, in which the plants have little time to put the roots. Some boulders are encrusted with lichens. They are the result of the symbiosis between a mushroom and an algae. The former ensures the logistics, the adherence to the substrata, and the ability to withstand the elements, while the second guarantees a continuous supply of sugars through photosynthesis. The result is excellent. The mushroom-algae pair is the first to settle on the lava. The higher plants arrive later, and in order to survive, they have to cling to the ground to resist the impact of the wind that blows ceaselessly. Their leaves are covered with hairs to trap droplets of water carried by the fog, which is a friend of life. The fog is the main source of water for high-altitude plants, because the soil does not retain water, which immediately flows away underground. Each lava expanse has a well-defined age. Its date of birth corresponds to the eruption that brought magma to the surface. 1, 2, 10, 20 years are the intervals of time that the volcano makes available for life to be born, get organised, and prepare to die. Yet, in this short span of time, plants give life to a structured community, with cushions of astragalus growing by creeping along the ground thickly, creating in their central section a moist microcosm protected from the wind that is the heart of the plant. The astragalus cushion acts as a cradle, a nursery for more delicate plants, the beginnings of a more complex vegetation that begins to take hold where the lava is older and a small valley or depression softens the strength of the storms. It is not uncommon for insects and spiders to land here, caught up in the wind at lower altitudes and transported high up by the drafts that blow up the slopes of the volcano. Many are destined to die because of the low night temperatures or lack of food, but some manage to survive and find a personal refuge. Plants, often thorny and toxic, provide some food, and this is where the first signs of the presence of an animal of some size can be found. A hare has left its unmistakable excrement. But when night falls, it ventures out into the open. In the remaining hours of daylight, it rests in the thick of an impenetrable shrub to hide from its most feared enemies, foxes and golden eagle. There is only one pair of golden eagles on Etna. The lack of prey and of suitable places to build nests makes it impossible for a second pair to settle. This female is the undisputed queen of the expanses of lava and shrubs that it flies over, in the hope that some hare has decided to come out into the open before it gets dark. Broom brushes push their roots into the expanse of sand and ash. They are plants exclusive to Etna and have an exceptional resistance. Insects and small vertebrates shelter among their stems. Lower down, the second ring in the succession of Etna environments corresponds to the woods, made up of broad-leaved trees and conifers. Sometimes they catch fire because of the incandescent lava that grazes them or streaks them like a black scar. But when they do manage to survive, they shelter a rich fauna. These pines are the result of artificial reforestation, but now appear very natural. Some are monumental plants. Others are just beginning to grow in the cracks where the wind has deposited a bit of humus and a pine nut was lucky enough to fall. Birches alternate with pine woods, a surprisingly boreal-like vegetation that has found the right growing conditions in the heart of the Mediterranean, as if it were in Lapland or Siberia. They are elegant plants, with a white trunk that contrasts sharply with the black lava. This lava cordon is the result of an eruption 20 years ago, and the birch forest has had time to develop. The soil here is very fertile, and even though water is scarce, the plants have found a way to push their roots deep into the soil. Etna is part of a regional park dedicated to the conservation of the rich biodiversity that in the rest of Sicily has been considerably reduced by a long process of colonization. Here, on the other hand, the volcano's intemperate behaviour has prevented humans from acting too arrogantly and has allowed many interesting life forms to survive, representing a cold, humid, biological refuge in the heart of one of the hottest parts of the entire European continent. At lower altitudes than the birches, an extensive and intact wood of oaks and other deciduous trees makes its way through the lava. The boulders and the trunks are covered with moss, which acts like a sponge, preserving the water even in times of drought. A fox slinks furtively through the undergrowth. It is the island's largest terrestrial predator, since wolves were wiped out at the beginning of the 20th century. Its diet includes fruit, berries, rodents, reptiles and, if desired, something more substantial. It could attempt to take one of a litter of wild boars, but they are jealously guarded by the sows. The wild boar is the most widespread ungulate on the island, and the only one that is truly indigenous. Wild boar can count on acorns and chestnuts, and of course, on an infinite variety of animal and vegetable substances that its sensitive snout can detect in the undergrowth. Humans have opened clearings in the wood, and profiting from the fertile volcanic soil, have planted small orchards. In the distance, we can see the blue Ionian, the stretch of sea that separates, or rather unites, Sicily to the rest of the eastern Mediterranean. Thanks to the orchards, insects are widely present, and here come the most deadly predators of the wood, which have their nest in some old trunks of chestnut or oak. Hornets. They have no match. No other animal can fight with this creature, equipped with sharp jaws and a venomous sting that is used for hunting and defence. These cousins of the wasp are 3 times larger and 10 times more dangerous. They cause the death of more people every year in Italy than all other wild creatures combined. Hornets really are super wasps. Although they also like to feed on sap and fruit, they are the deadliest enemies of all the insects in the woodland and in the clearings. As soon as they spot their prey, they seize upon it and strike it with their stingers loaded with venom and start to tear it apart with the same voracity with which a lion dismembers a buffalo. They are capable of slicing up any prey with their mandibles, which are as sharp as shears. Then the victim, reduced to a small mass, is carried to the nest. Even wasps are not spared. A hornet colony can kill thousands of insects, bringing fresh meat to the nest without rest. The only species which is carefully avoided by the hornets and all other kinds of predators is this tiny, slow moth, whose striking coloration announces to all predators that they are toxic and inedible. They can indulge in long courtship and mating rituals without fear of being killed by anything. The hornet's nest is hidden deep in the trunk of a tree and is virtually impregnable. The combs are made of paper obtained by the soft wood of some trees. They chew the branches to obtain a pulp of cellulosa mixed with saliva, a wonderful papier-mâché ready to form the hexagonal cells of the growing colonial nest. It is a rather complex building, well hidden in the hole of a large trunk. It is ruled by the queen, the only fertile female which lays her eggs, and it is the headquarters of a community that has grown to several hundred workers. A guard always protects the entrance to an impregnable nest that no animal would ever dream of attacking, at least not without adequate protection. Even the most terrible of the super predators will eventually come across something more powerful than itself. In fact, there is one animal that has the tools and the skills to deal with these super wasps. The honey buzzard. The body of this large bird of prey is covered with a thick plumage that is elastic and resistant to stings. Only the eyes are vulnerable to attack by hornets and wasps, but the buzzard has once more brought a honeycomb full of larvae to the nest to feed her chicks. It is a diffident, distrustful raptor, always looking around to make sure that there are no enemies in sight. Then, once the meal is over, it sets off on a new hunting expedition. The Etna woods extend mainly on the northern side of the volcano, where rainfall is more abundant and the humidity is higher. Where they have been overexploited and cut down, they have been replaced by expanses of bush that in spring are covered with blooms. This is the start of the largest range of environments, the third ring, that corresponds to the lowest altitudes, where people have had the time and the strength to cultivate the most ancient expanses of lava. It stretches for about 50 kilometres and covers the slopes of the large volcano, closed to the north by the valley dug out by the Anapo, and to the south by the one marked by the course of the Simeto, both fed by snow and rain falling on Mount Etna. It rains very little at the base of the volcano, just 300 millimetres a year, the same as in North Africa. The rains are concentrated in a 4-month rainy season spanning autumn and winter. Otherwise, there is only a long dry season that lasts from April until October. This cycle affects the development of the vegetation and the natural history of all living creatures, plants and animals. Before the sun transforms the scrubland into a bleak expanse of withered plants, in a few tens of square metres of earth, dozens of species of plants with showy blooms can be spotted among the stones, rocks and clumps of prickly grasses. These are the perennials, those that never die, because they have tubers, bulbs and succulent roots to see them through the long summer break when all their external parts, leaves and stems, die. In the height of the summer season, with temperatures on the ground touching 50 degrees, most bushes start to lose their leaves. Blackberries attract many animals. Among the favourite exploiters, one of the largest European butterflies, the two-tailed pasha, as large as a passerine bird. Etna is a special place for many other species of butterflies, which gather on the flowers.
The caterpillar of the peacock moth butterfly grows on wild blackberries and other wild rosacea. Like all caterpillars, it has 3 pairs of true legs at the front and 4 pairs of prolegs on the back of its body. Thanks to its healthy appetite, the larva reaches its full size in 40 days, multiplying its original weight by 10,000, and then it is ready to build its cocoon with silk threads. In the course of the millennia, the pressure of herbivores has led the plants to defend themselves with spines and toxic substances. Livestock, but also insects, avoid ferula, a large plant of the Umbellifera. This could be considered a symbol of Sicily's farmland, a huge herb with a wooden stem which is widely used to build structures and to provide fuel. Ferulas have flowers of exceptional value for insects because their leaves are avoided by livestock. Sheep, cattle and wild herbivores all keep away from the toxic milk of the euphorbia. Almost all insects do the same. The euphorbia hawk moth caterpillar is the only animal in Europe which is able to feed on the poisonous euphorbia leaves in order to transform into a beautiful olive and pink hawk moth. In the distance, the silhouette of the volcano, with its unmistakable plume of smoke, dominates one of the most desolate parts of the island. An area where population density is very low, and agricultural activity is still carried out by traditional methods. Fruit plants, pistachios, citrus fruits alternate with expanses of wild scrub, where the lava has prevented even the cultivation of prickly pears, but has provided the basic material for every construction. Now, most of these stone walls are completely abandoned. It is a pity, but somebody chose to utilize them, because in the gentle rolling grassy landscape, they are like the copiers of the Serengeti. The stones are covered with lichens and small fat plants, sedum, which bloom in the early spring, the short spring of Sicily, one of the driest places in the Mediterranean. Due to the high temperatures in the day, life takes place mainly at night. Bush crickets that during the day have remained sheltered from the leaves and thorns, at night go out in search of food. Green bush crickets are able to feed on the hairy and poisonous caterpillar of the gypsy moth. Smaller species are skilled hunters and don't hesitate to stoop to cannibalism. They have to be careful though, because this is also the hunting territory of the tarantulas. The spiders are very fast. They grab their prey with their legs and immediately inject a venom that paralyzes it. A female lovingly carries her cocoon containing hundreds of eggs. She is willing to sacrifice her life rather than give up her cumbersome and conspicuous burden. Then, at dawn, spiders and bush crickets withdraw, while the sun begins to light up the countryside on the slopes of Etna. The Simeto Valley extends on the southern side of Etna, crossed by the most important river in Sicily, which flows towards Catania. The Simeto River is fed by melting snow and the rains of the volcano. One of its more spectacular spots is the bridge of the Saraceni, which dates back to the Roman Empire. The Saracen Bridge was rebuilt and modified in the 12th century in the Middle Ages by the Normans. The bridge crosses a stretch of lava gorges, a particular basaltic formation due to even more ancient flows from Etna. Here the river crosses an area of pastures and citrus groves, and lingers to form pools of calm, deep water that are a great attraction for insects in the sunny countryside. Ants are active in the cooler hours, leaving the nest as soon as it gets light to search for food. Thanks to the omnivorous and scavenger species, the environment is cleaned of waste and dead bodies of all kinds. But many species are herbivorous, even granivorous, collecting the seeds of annual plants. Ants must fend themselves from the hot sun rays, hiding in the nest when the sun is high in the sky. But early in the morning they are active, and they meet their most terrible enemy. Immobile during the cool, damp night, ant lions wait for the sun to warm them. They're not dragonflies, they belong to a very particular order, the Neuroptera. Their larvae have been working through the night, digging a series of small funnel-shaped holes in the sand. These are simple but effective traps, in the centre of which lurk the ant-lion larvae, with their soft defenceless bodies and two enormous pincer-like jaws. It becomes not merely inconvenient, but also very risky for ants to move through this minefield. The ants try to circumvent the area of the funnels. Any ant that falls into the hole has little chance of avoiding the jets of sand, and then the terrible jaws waiting to seize the prey and inject venomous saliva into its body. It is a tomb with no way out. This battle is repeated every day. The ants cannot avoid crossing the minefield, and the ant lions are there to demand their tribute. One ant is stronger or luckier than the others. This brave, strong ant is safe and can resume its walk in search of seeds. The abundance of insects attracts many birds, such as bee-eaters, which, after spending the winter in Africa south of the Sahara, arrive in Sicily in the spring. Bee-eaters nest in tunnels excavated in the soil, sometimes in vertical riverbanks, sometimes directly on the ground where the soil is softer. They eat insects of all kinds. It is enough to wait near their nests to see a veritable list of the insect life of the steppes. A cabbage-white butterfly, bee, painted lady. This, however, survived. It is a beautiful dragonfly. Bee-eaters catch insects in mid-air, and they do not refrain from attacking even the most dangerous insect in these parts, the hornet. They are able to kill them by beating them repeatedly on a branch until they are dead and harmless. Then they can be swallowed. All that remains of the insect's body is a pellet, which is regurgitated from their stomach. The bee-eaters are summer guests on Etna, together with many other colourful migratory birds, like the sea jays. They also nest along the banks of the Simeto, drawn by this wonderful little river that flows through a sun-drenched land. The Alcantara is famous for its impressive gorges excavated in rather young basaltic rocks which date back some 8,000 years. The basaltic lava, low in silica but rich in iron, magnesium and calcium, cooled very quickly due to the river water, and has thus given rise to pentagonal and hexagonal prismatic forms, which recall the molecular structure of the materials that make it up. The rock, deeply fractured, lines up in curious shapes that seem to be the work of a human hand, a pile of wood, a harp, or a rosette. The most regular formations are the vertical ones, the organ pipes, that can reach 30 metres in height. At their narrowest points, the gorges are less than 2 metres wide, and here the water flows tumultuously. Wood pigeons are widespread on the banks of the river. These large pigeons were once rather scarce in Sicily, but are now rapidly increasing, although they represent the favourite prey of a family of peregrine falcons, which has decided to nest among the steep slopes. The peregrine falcon is the fastest and most skilled of the winged hunters, but needs a lot of space for its aerial manoeuvres. The peregrine falcon chicks have now grown, and they have left their nest, located in a cleft of the rocks overlooking the river. But they must be careful. They could fall. they rest on small ledges and try to maintain their balance while preening their feathers. If they fell, there would be no protection. The current would sweep them away. But the desire to get out of the narrow hole where they have lived for weeks is too strong. The day of their escape from the narrow river gorge has arrived. The river continues to flow towards the Sicilian coast, cutting increasingly deep into the basalt. The path of the water can be diverted, but it cannot be stopped and will always flow downhill. That is sure. Equally certain is that the whole landscape on the slopes of Etna is destined to change, whether we like it or not. The lava has reached the coast of the sea and has given rise to an impressive cliff and a series of small islands that emerge from the blue waters. Etna has been here for about 200,000 years, and in living memory erupts majestically at least once a year. It is a relatively young, vigorous volcano, and in recent times vents have opened on the slopes at very low altitude, and from here rivers of lava have flown down, wiping out everything they find in their way. Workers scramble to block the lava path with the most powerful bulldozers and even dynamite, trying to erect dams to stop and divert the rivers of lava and save homes. But woods, stretches of scrubland and crops have often disappeared within a matter of hours. It seems almost impossible that this landscape can be so radically transformed and sterilized within a few hours, but the volcano can do exactly that. If it decides to unleash the power rumbling in the belly of the earth, it does so in a few moments. With clouds of incandescent ash, showers of lapilli, and above all, flows of molten lava. It is a grandiose spectacle that attracts millions of tourists who reach the Sapienza refuge at a height of almost 2,000 meters, miraculously spared by the eruptions. From here, thanks to a cable car and special vehicles, you can almost reach the edge of the main crater, knowing, as the guides point out, that the volcano is unpredictable and can claim a human life at any moment if you are not prudent. The volcano has turned into a burning torch, and not until the following day, when the columns of smoke and steam have dispersed, will it be possible to understand the extent of the eruption and the damage. And to what extent and in what way life will have to recover what the volcano has destroyed in a single night.
1 million years ago, Italy was a battlefield where enormous violent volcanoes offered competing displays of bursts of fire, lava flows, clouds of hot ash and showers of lapilli. They raised mountains and erased valleys. It was a mineral world. There was no room for plants or animals. Then, 100,000 years ago, one by one the volcanoes stopped erupting. Rain gradually filled the ancient craters, turning them into lakes. It was the beginning of a new adventure for life, which this time conquered the land of volcanoes. Dormant, but not extinct. Even today, ancient volcanoes continue to mutter away underground in central Italy and push columns of gas saturated with sulfur to the surface, causing the water that collects in the bottom of the craters to bubble. One such is the caldera of Manciana, a wide depression a few hundred meters across, the active remains of the ancient Sabatino volcano. On the banks is a forest of birch, trees typical of the far north, which usually grow in the taiga of Scandinavia and Siberia, but here can grow at sea level, in the heart of the Mediterranean. They probably arrived in Manciana 12,000 years ago, during the last ice age, when glaciers covered much of this region. A refuge for species that love the cold and water. At the center of the caldera is a constantly erupting geyser, surrounded by pools and springs, where the underground gas transforms rainwater into sparkling, sulfur-flavored water. It is blue, milky, and not much suited to sustaining life. Here, there is a kind of reed equipped with a special system for expelling excessive sulfites. However, the turbid water is ideal for ambushing. There is no escape for a tadpole that has passed too close to the dragonfly's jaws, which are prodigious tools for capturing prey. The insect can capture as many as 3 or 4 tadpoles a day, but may also fast for a week. It is the most formidable predator in these pools. Only 1 in 100 tadpoles becomes a frog, but that is the law of nature. Sulfur saturates the soil, the air and the water, which flows, cutting into the rocks, opening the way to the river Mignone, the main stream in the area, and from there to the volcanic lake that has formed in the main crater. But it is a journey of hundreds of kilometers through a tormented landscape that retains many vestiges of ancient volcanic activity. The Rio Lupo, as this small stream of sulphurous water is called, looks uninviting. Here you can find half the periodic table in a drop of water. It was a laboratory of chemical compounds which aroused the interests of the inhabitants of the area since ancient times. The first to exploit the deposits of sulphur and iron, but also of gold and silver, were the Etruscans. Their necropolises are carved into the rock. They are fascinating because they are immersed in a natural landscape, the same that must have existed in this area when they were constructed a few centuries before Christ. Cave bush crickets like Etruscan tombs. They feel safe in the darkness. Thanks to their long antennae and hair, they are able to meet partners and to find their special food, droppings left by bats. The plants and animals probably have not changed since that far-off time either. Like the Tyrrhenian lizard and the gecko, small reptiles that hide in the rocks and hunt insects. Like the kestrel, a small falcon that nests in the rocks and hunts lizards and geckos. The air is cold, but the water that bubbles up from underground is warm, forming a fog that even sunlight cannot fade. These are toxic clouds, and on still nights they linger on the ground. They are a death trap for animals, which asphyxiate before they know what has happened. Crows know they will find a carcass to eat, but prudently wait for the breeze to clear the air. This time, it is a badger who suffers. It's a strong and courageous animal that will take on any enemy, but is helpless in the face of toxic mists and is very vulnerable because of its short stature. The torrent of sulphurous, toxic water runs along the bottom of the canyon, eroding the soft and friable tufa rock, which was formed by the ash of the last eruption 600,000 years ago. In this stretch of the river there are no fish, insects, frogs or salamanders. They would die in a few moments. But there is one brave creature that has decided to defy the ban on swimming. The green woodpecker is a smart bird, and it knows the sulphurous water keeps pests away from its feathers. Of course, it will smell of sulphur, but even people like to immerse themselves in the sulphurous thermal waters that are also good for the skin. Wild bees have built their nest high up, where the air is pure and the sulphur fumes cannot reach. The wax combs are hanging on a rocky ledge and hang straight down following the laws of gravity. Now the bees have moved and have collected in a compact swarm hanging from the branches of an olive tree. They are protecting their queen, waiting for the completion of the nest the explorers have found not far from here. The toxic environment, dominated by volcanic chemistry, seems to influence all aspects of life. Even the plants dedicate themselves to chemical experiments. Over the course of the millennia, in fact, the presence of herbivores have led the plants to defend themselves with toxic substances. Livestock avoid the toxic milk of the euphorbia, Almost all insects do the same. The Euphorbia hawk moth caterpillar is the only animal in Europe which is able to feed on the poisonous leaves of this plant in order to transform into a beautiful olive and pink butterfly. The sulphurous water is now diluted. Continuously oxygenated by the rushing stream, it has changed in appearance. It no longer smells of sulphurs and has become transparent. It still has a sour taste, but is drinkable, at least for a thirsty badger. Now the river can accommodate one of the rarest and most endangered creatures in the Mediterranean. A small amphibian that is only found in this area. The spectacled salamander. This small animal, no longer than a finger, sports a striking white, red and black colouring to indicate that the little creature's toxic skin makes it dangerous. It is inedible for any predator. But that does not mean it is not threatened by habitat changes caused by men. Fortunately, this area has been spared, and every year dozens of specimens spawn. The salamanders are usually invisible. For 360 days a year they live hidden in the woods. Then, for less than a week, they rush en masse to small pools of cold water to fix their gelatinous eggs to submerged twigs. Having deposited the eggs, they return to hide under rocks and logs. From now on, no one will know they exist until next year. The night and the forest hide salamanders and other amphibians from the eyes of their enemies. Many Orthoptera dedicate the night to reproduction. The banks of the river, covered with thick bushes, are the favourite haunt of many species of crickets. The delicate Acrometopoda lays its eggs in the branch of a tree after etching the bark with its razor-sharp ovipositor. All this happens in total darkness, which protects it, although not always. The tarantula has no holes and does not weave webs. It hunts by chasing like a wild dog. Its bite is painful to humans, but not usually dangerous, the books tell us. We never tested it, but for the bush cricket, the bite is surely deadly. The body of the prey is transformed into a protein shake and will be sucked through the jaws. Somebody will clean the crime scene as soon as the sun rises. The river continues its journey through the Maremma, one of the most sparsely inhabited regions in Italy. Some woods have not been cut down for many decades and have gradually returned to their natural state, filling with fallen, rotting logs eaten away by fungi, bacteria and arthropods. Ants play an important role in the cycle of organic matter, particularly the species that feed on wood, such as Crematogaster ants. There is a nest of ants, colony or hive, around every 10 metres. Probably their number exceeds that of all the other inhabitants of the wilderness put together. Inside every nest, organised chaos reigns. Many workers have yellow heads. They are newly metamorphosed specimens whose bodies are so pale and tender that they cannot be exposed to the outside world, but are restricted to caring for the young in the darkness of the hive. Later, when their heads turn red and their bodies darken and harden, they will be ready to carry out their duties outside, including fiercely defending the nest from attacks by enemies, biting and spraying formic acid. Ants have a few enemies, including the Italian lacewing, but their worst enemies are perhaps others of their own kind. Fighting continuously breaks out between individuals from different species, each with a distinctive odour that acts like a uniform or identity card. Small red ants consider Camponotus ants their fiercest enemies. A small team of red ants explores the territory of a colony of Camponotus. They are immediately spotted by their cousins, and the chase begins. This time, the larger ants can easily arrest the invasion. There are no survivors. Their bodies will be stored in the spacious underground storage area. The Rio Lupo has now become the river Mignone and flows through an ever deeper, ever more shadowy gorge, where the sun reaches the bottom for only a few moments a day. The humidity is so high that tiny water droplets condense on the trunks and branches, providing moisture for ferns and mosses. Mosses are real sponges that play an irreplaceable role in the life of the forest, absorbing water when it is abundant and giving it back slowly when in short supply, making it available to all the creatures living in the gorge. Moss is used by blue tits to line the cavity where they deposit their eggs. Long-tailed tits, on the other hand, use a very special material, lichens. These are finely woven to form a soft bag that these relative of the blue tits have hidden in the tangle of branches. Tits and other insectivorous birds have healthy appetites. They devour a prodigious amount of caterpillars and help protect plants from many pests. But they are not able to deal with a living fortress like the caterpillar of the Gypsy Moth. These caterpillars covered with stinging hairs are practically invulnerable. There is only one animal able to take them on. The Calisoma is a beetle with an insatiable appetite. It begins to eat the caterpillar when it is still alive. Its glittering armour protects it from the hairs, while the mandibles cut up the victim. Once rendered harmless, the caterpillar turns into an edible jelly, and the beetle can eat dozens in a single day. So much so that there are those who follow it to take advantage of a free snack. Calisoma beetles are a real problem for these moths, because out of 1,000 eggs, only one becomes a chrysalis. But one moth can create a generation of hundreds of caterpillars. The great oaks that grow on the ashes of the ancient volcano seem to know that there will be more infestations of caterpillars and stand there, solid, ready to face the next attack. The stream has plenty of water in the spring, the time when most aquatic insects decide to reproduce. Pebbles and plants are the theatre of the amorous passions of the damselflies. Male damselflies are territorial and spend much of their time on their perches, from which they depart for short flights of display or to hunt. If a female approaches the male, he chases her and grabs her around the neck with his cerci. These aerobatics end with the characteristic heart-shaped pose, during which the male transfers the sperm into the female genital cavities. The small fish surviving in the deeper pools are native species, and sometimes do not even have a common name. They have evolved over time in completely isolated worlds, developing an exceptional ability to overcome the drought by taking refuge in tiny pools. A solitary ruin overlooks the land of volcanoes. It belongs to the town of Canale Monterano, which flourished until the 18th century. People lived on the banks of the river and built mills to grind wheat and olives using the power of the water. But today, the situation is very different. Then war and disease forced the villagers to move away. There is no one left. The place is deserted, and the village is abandoned and in ruins. This small village has been abandoned by people, but not by animals. During the night, squares, courtyards and streets are animated by a number of creatures which are invisible during daylight. Wild boars come out of the bush to feed on roots and earthworms, while a pine marten carefully marks with its scent its personal home range. When the sun rises, all night citizens are ready to hide among the walls and bushes of the old ruined town, but some do not care too much to hide. Badgers and porcupines are among them. Porcupines are the largest European rodents, and they make their dens among the ruins. Now they hunt in daylight. The last poachers have retired, and these animals no longer have enemies. A small fountain has resisted the ravages of time and man. It is a paradise for the wood frogs. Other amphibians have chosen an unusual spot in which to reproduce. The toads are in love. Males and females congregate in areas they have inhabited since time immemorial to renew their courtship, mating and spawning. These have chosen the flooded necropolis close to Canale Monterano that dates back 25 centuries. There are still many toads here, but their numbers are decreasing dramatically in much of Europe. Their extinction is taking place in silence, with few aware of it. On its journey to the crater lake, the stream has deposited elegant concretions that hang down like columns from almost vertical walls. It is a difficult hunting ground, but not impossible for the most agile of carnivores. A marten raises an alarmed reaction from the lord of the ravine, the peregrine falcon. The marten has found something interesting at the base of the cliff, but the whip snake is a tough nut to crack. It is strong and aggressive and cannot be caught from behind. The marten had better look for easier prey. These rocks are also frequented by the most acrobatic of insectivorous birds, the wall creeper, which meticulously explores every crack looking for small insects and spiders. The wall creeper is fluttering not far from the falcon's nest, but it knows it will be safe if it keeps close to the rocks. The peregrine falcon is the fastest and the most skilled of the winged hunters, but needs a lot of space for its aerial maneuvers. No hawk would be crazy enough to risk slamming into a rock wall at 300 kilometers an hour to catch a prey of a few grams. The peregrine falcon chicks have now grown and are ready to leave their nest, located in a cleft of the rocks overlooking the river. But they must be careful. They could fall. If they fell, there would be no protection. The current would sweep them away. But the desire to get out of the narrow hole where they have lived for weeks is too strong. Finally, the day of their escape from the nest arrives. Taking advantage of the wind, the young falcons have landed on top of the gorge. Even a plant becomes an excuse to play, to flex their lethal claws and master their strong, sharp beaks. But then, as sometimes happens between sisters, they begin to fight. These are games of survival that prepare them for a life of daring dives and territorial disputes. The sooner they gain experience, the better. On its journey to the crater lake, the stream forms a waterfall. It is just 2 meters high, but it is a difficult obstacle for fish. Once a year, the shad have to swim against the current to spawn. The abundance of fish has attracted a flock of cormorants. It is hard to understand how cormorants can find fish in water so muddy that there are only a few inches of visibility, but they do. In fact, they seem to enjoy the swift currents that hurl themselves against the rocks. This is the avant-garde of cormorant flocks which congregate in the Lake of Bracciano, the great basin formed in the extinct volcano, the final destination of the waters of the small stream. The great basin appears in all its majesty beyond the crest of the crater. This is Lake Bracciano, the 8th largest lake in Italy, the final destination of the waters of the Rio Lupo. It is perfectly circular, 15 kilometers in diameter and about 50 kilometers in circumference. It is like a small freshwater sea. And just like the sea, it can become stormy when the mistral wind blows. Gulls ride the gusts, manoeuvring against the wind that is now blowing at over 40 knots. The black-headed gulls are migratory. They have come here from northern Europe to spend the winter. Waves sweep the pier of one of the small towns on the shore of the lake. A crow needs to be careful not to be swept away by the water. The lake is a fishing reserve for the cormorants that arrive in large numbers at the beginning of winter. After fishing, they must dry their feathers, and they perch on poles, exposing their open wings to the wind. They are heavy birds, graceful in the water, but rather clumsy in flight. Each takeoff or landing requires a certain effort. There are many adults, but also many young, with white bellies, born last summer on some remote cliff overlooking the Baltic Sea. When the wind drops, the lake is transformed into a mirror. Lake Bracciano has only a small tributary and a modest outlet, so it takes a long time for the water to change. It takes over 100 years for the water of the lake to be completely renewed, longer than for the waters of the Mediterranean to be replaced through the Strait of Gibraltar. This has been the salvation of Lake Bracciano, but it is also the reason for its extreme vulnerability. If the lake became tainted with pollutants, it would be an absolute environmental disaster. Fortunately, it continues to be filled with clear water. It is a reserve of 5 billion cubic meters of water for Rome and a wetland of European-wide interest for waterfowl that can rely on water free from the ice even in the coldest winters. The great crested grebes practice deep-sea fishing in these waters. They live, sleep and eat in the water. Their plumage is fully waterproof and their bodies hydrodynamic, allowing for quick, silent diving that does not alert the fish. They can dive to as much as 60 meters and remain underwater for more than half a minute. Black black-necked grebes like to live in small groups and go fishing away from the shore to try to find schools of small fish. If something threatens them from above, their response is immediate. There are many coots and diving ducks, such as the common pochard from the Baltic region and Eastern Europe. They dive noisily, lacking the elegance of grebes, but they are not worried about fish escaping, as they feed on shellfish and aquatic plants. They are among the few birds that can feed themselves far from the shore. Lake Bracciano, in fact, reaches a depth of 165 metres, and since the banks go down steeply, it is mainly suitable for diving birds or the giraffes of the lake. Swans. A pair of swans gently courting. These birds stay together all year and for many years in a row. They are the very symbol of conjugal love. Or so it seems. DNA analysis of cygnets has revealed a disturbing fact. At least a third of the cygnets do not carry the genes of the mother's partner, and there is only one explanation. In one area of the lake, the shore slopes more gently, and a dense reed bed has grown up because the storks are able to anchor their roots to the lake bed and to allow their ears full of seeds to emerge from the water. A group of Eurasian penduline tits are carefully exploring the reeds. They seem to have found something interesting nestled in the stalks. Although it looks like a small chicken, the water rail is related to the crane. It has long toes and a strong beak, which it uses to rummage through the mud and among the reeds in search of small animals. It is not easy to spot, but its loud cry sounds like a pig squealing, hence its Italian name, Porciglione, which means little pig. In the evening, one of the rarest and most endangered birds in Europe goes into action. The bittern is a large heron with plumage the colour of dried reeds. It is perfectly camouflaged. Its every movement is slow and studied to make sure it is not spotted by enemies and enable it to stalk its prey. It dips its beak into the water like a sensor to locate a fish or a shrimp through detecting vibration. There are only a few thousand couples left in Europe, and the volcanic lakes and reed beds are an important natural refuge for this species. Every day as sunset approaches, the marsh harrier explores the banks of the lake. It flies lightly, its path seemingly random, but it is hunting methodically, systematically sweeping the edge of the reed bed for hours. Sooner or later, it will take one of the less cautious creatures by surprise. Each year, when spring comes, the starlings that have spent the winter on the shores of the lake congregate in large groups. They gather their strength, close ranks, and prepare for the migratory flight that will take them to Central and Eastern Europe, more than 2,000 kilometers away from Lake Bracciano. They have decided to sleep on the banks of the lake because it is sheltered from the wind and from predators. They land in fields where the wheat is beginning to sprout for a final supper before going to sleep. There are thousands, tens of thousands of them. A buzzard dives into the group, hoping to capture a stray bird in the confusion, but the starlings move in unison and form a compact wall that wards off any attack. The starlings are not afraid of the giant, colourful bird that flies through the sky with them and gradually take up residence on their roosts. It is their last night on the shores of the volcanic lake. Tomorrow they leave. On the banks of the crater, the oaks are still bare, but the hoopoes have arrived. A multicoloured carpet of flowers is visited first by insects in search of nectar. These are flowers that bloom in the undergrowth before the trees get their leaves in order to take advantage of a few weeks of light. Many insects are searching for nectar. Others devote themselves to procuring materials to build nests. Bumblebees are busy in their underground nest. On the shores of the lake, mud daubers collect mud for their small, earthenware nests. They are shaped like amphora, and the larvae grow inside. At metamorphosis, they break the operculum and free themselves from their casing. Then fly away, with no one to guide them or teach them how to build mud nests. But you can be sure that in a year they will make them perfectly. The reeds protect the broods of waterfowl, keeping them safe from terrestrial predators. No fox can go deep into the water to reach the coot's raft or raid a brood of small hens. A pair of moorhens busy with their young. Moorhen chicks are autonomous, meaning they can swim despite being born just a few hours earlier, but they need to be encouraged by the full buffet of treats the lakeside can offer. The adults never let down their guard because the threat can come from underwater as well as from above. Because there are watchful eyes peering down at what is happening below. The black kites have returned to the shores of the lake. They have spent the winter in Africa, south of the Sahara, and crossed the desert and the sea to get here. They are light, with long, broad wings, and can glide effortlessly, brushing by each other as they mark out the borders of their nesting area in the woods overlooking the lake shore. Spring is spawning time for most amphibians. Crested newts congregate in shallow pools, plenty of plants to court their females. These small water dragons are much larger than common newts, which have already started to fix their eggs to plant leaves and stems. banks, the army of European green toads that have wintered in deep tunnels is getting ready to move. Each burrow is inhabited by 1, 2, 3 toads that wait until nightfall to go out onto the lake to spawn. They fear the heat and the sun's rays. But today, the toads do not have to wait for the evening to come out of their shelters, because something extraordinary is happening. An astronomical event that has not occurred for almost 20 years. It is the eclipse of the spring equinox. The moon slowly eats into the disk that gives life to the planet. The animals are quick to get into the water. Intimidated by this terrifying event, the toads are silent. Then the sun shines again on this land forged by volcanoes and its lake, and the concert of songs and calls rises again. The sun has defeated the moon, just as 100,000 years ago the water defeated the fire of the earth. Life can continue on its course on the shores of this lake, which is as old as the volcano that it has replaced.